Hello, welcome to World Insight on CCTV News. I'm Wang Mengmang in Beijing. Coming up on today's program, Boao Forum. As China faces slowing growth and the need for structural reform, Premier Li Keqiang reiterates that the country has prepared tools to keep the economy stable. And transition for Myanmar. NLD leader Suu Kyi has been nominated to the new cabinet as the country grapples with both political and economic transformations. What lies ahead? Well, we start today's show from China's southern island province of Hainan, where global leaders have gathered for the Boao Forum. The forum is a high-end platform for dialogue between government leaders and industrial and business elites from Asia and beyond. Now, the theme for this year's conference is about Asia's new future. Trade volume in Asia has reached 1/3 of the global total. Now, as the top economy in this region, China's development and stability has become increasingly important. Chinese Premier Li Keqiang delivered a keynote speech at Boao Forum's opening ceremony, expressing his confidence in the Chinese economy and other Asian economies.
New dynamics for development. This year's forum is aimed at promoting discussion on how Asian economies will steer economic restructuring and how to develop new sources of growth for the world economy. Asia has recently suffered from an economic slowdown and has undergone structural reforms in various countries. As a result, many people are doubtful about the region's economic future. But in a speech this morning, Premier Li Keqiang reiterated that he believes the Asian economy still has a bright future.
Asia is an important force for world peace and development. It is also an important engine for economic growth and an important contributor to the progress of the world civilization. We will overcome temporary difficulties and embrace a bright future.
The Emerging Economies Report has showed that the contribution of major 11 Asian emerging economies, also called the E11, reached about 53% of global GDP, higher than G7 countries' 23% and EU members' 12.2% last year. China's economic outlook is also an important issue on the agenda. Last year, China's economic growth rate slowed to a 25-year low of 6.9%. China is in the middle of painstaking transition from growth driven by investment and exports to growth led by consumption and the services sector. As such, the government has set a target of this year's GDP range between 6.5% and 7% and has decided to keep pushing supply-side reforms.
Since the beginning of this year, the Chinese economy kicked off with a stable performance. There have also been positive and new changes. We have put in place a number of policies aimed at steady growth, restructuring, and reform. These measures are taking effect.
As the big part in Asian economy, China's growth would affect this region's development a lot. Li also emphasized the importance of cooperation in promoting Asia's new vision.
China stands ready to link the Belt and Road Initiative with the development plans of countries in Asia and regional organizations. Asian countries need to ride the global trend of the new technology revolution, enhance exchanges, and draw on each other's experience to advance scientific and technological progress.
This year's Boao Forum comes at a crucial time as the new driver for regional growth is needed urgently.
And now to get more discussion on this year's Boao Forum for Asia, we're joined in our Beijing studio by Professor Huo Deming. He's professor of the National School of Development at Peking University. It's always great to have you with us, Professor Huo. And in Hong Kong, we have Xiao Geng, professor of finance and public policy at the University of Hong Kong. And also in London, we're joined by Mr. John Ross, senior fellow at the Chongyang Institute for Financial Studies at Renmin University of China. Gentlemen, welcome to World Insight. So let's begin, Professor Huo, with the theme of this year's Boao Forum. It seems that finding new dynamics and new visions is crucial for shaping Asia's future. Now, how would you define these dynamics and visions, and to what extent will they help shape Asia's future?
Okay, dynamics means change or changes. Visions means directions. And of course, what's the cause of changes or the direction when economy of China is slowing down? Let's put it in the blank in a blunt way. So in a sense that China's excessive high growth rate, it will stop or will decline in the future, that's well known. But then what is not well known is when the economy is slowing down, what's the consequence of China with respect to other countries, and this is Boao Forum's focus. Now when you focus on changes, everybody knows. But what will be the future? The direction of change, that is China, whether it's going to have more government intervention, whether this One Belt, One Road things is going to be contingent on the government investment, or whether there's a market resolutions. I think this is the focus of everybody's attention.
Right, and let's turn to Professor Xiao there. What do you think will be the new breakthroughs for Asia?
I think for Asia, the population is more than 60%, and also the GDP is also now more than 50%. And the population means that our innovation is actually by people. So there are great potentials, in innovation and in market development. And also Asia actually has very uneven development. And China, of course, has been very successful in the past 30 years, but the other countries like India and other countries are still has a lot of catching up potentials. So I think there are a lot of possibilities, and that's why some of the public investments in infrastructure, both hard and soft infrastructure, would be very helpful to maintain the momentum of Asia's miracle in the last few decades.
And Professor Xiao, as you mentioned, Asian economies are very diverse. There are some of the world's richest economies, and then there are some of the world's poorest economies, as well as very promising emerging markets. So I'd like to ask you this, Mr. Ross, can we expect the Boao Forum to provide a common development goal for all these economies despite their differences?
Well, yes, I thought it was very interesting what the Premier said this morning about stressing the need for peaceful development in Asia. I think this is because that really is the key condition. I think the big geopolitical and geoeconomic situation is that the centre of growth in Asia is moving from very East Asia, which is basically China plus Japan, with South Korea there as well, really to South and East Asia. The big new development that's taking place in Asia is the very much speeding up of the Indian economy. So this means that looking to the south and also looking to Southeast Asia, which is between China and economy, is going to be very crucial. And that's obviously where the One Belt, One Road initiative fits in with that. China's got to look now inland and to its south as well. Japan's economy is in a big mess, and it's not very likely to get out of it soon. So it's become a rather passive factor in the situation. From the point of view of growth, it's doing all sorts of things politically, but they won't impact the region greatly economically.
Well, indeed, we are seeing some changing economic realities. And Professor Hu, I'd like to ask you this. To what extent do you think that innovation can help be the driving force?
Well, in the developed economies such as US and UK, innovations means inventing new things, but in China or in the rest of the more developing world, innovation many times means the adaptations of the new innovations, technological innovations already happen. So in a sense that still we have very incomplete market. So the market is not so sophisticated in adapting all these innovations with respect to the highest degrees. Oh, how to get the rest of the economy to be catching up with the developed world, and with the innovation help from them. I think with respect to our own economies, we do need our own innovation in a very special ways. Of course, we cannot reinvent Apple, we cannot reinvent Microsoft, but we can do with Xiaomi.
Right. Do you think that Asian economies are well prepared to embrace innovation and to really create this ecosystem for the emergence of new ideas?
It's going to be pretty tough. I mean, innovation is not just doing like this. You need hundreds of years accumulating information and probably human capital.
And at the same time, even though that world media is paying a lot of attention to the Boao Forum for Asia, there are concerns that a lot of the things that Premier Li Keqiang said today at the opening ceremony has been heard before. They say there's no new information from this speech. However, Premier Li was trying to send this message of reassurances to the world. So how would you respond to these concerns?
Oh, well, I think every year with some catching points. I think for this year, I'm more sort of hopeful hearing Li Keqiang saying that we're going to maintain at least 7.5% growth, 6.5% growth rate GDP for next 5 years, which is an official guarantee from the Chinese government. Now, when I was talking to experts, foreign experts, say in the U.S., they were always asking me whether it's going to hard landing, and then in a way, they're really asking whether Chinese growth rate is going to fall below 6% or 5%. Now, I'm glad to hear that Li Keqiang is reassuring the rest of, say, China and the world that China is going to keep a moderately high growth rate.
And Professor Xiao, how important do you think this sense of confidence is in assuring world investors? I mean, Premier Li was not only confident about the Chinese growth, but also Asia's prospect as a whole.
Well, I think Premier Li clearly trying to send a message that China not only is carry out structural reforms for long-term growth, but also are ready to provide short-term stabilizations so that the Chinese growth will be reasonably stable, because China is really essential to global growth stability. And also China now is trying very hard to help its neighbors, through One Belt, One Road and other initiatives, so that the entire region, the Asia really is the growth engine for the global economy. So I think the Asia is essential for global growth stability, because Europe, Japan, and even America, their growth rate are very limited because they are already an advanced economy. But Asia, as I said before, they are diverse economies, so there are potentials for capacity cooperation, and also for learning from each other, and also for working together to prevent potential financial instabilities. So I think there are a lot of things Asia can do together to lay the foundation for global growth.
Now let's get some Western perspectives. Mr. Ross, when Western investors look at Asian economies or Chinese economies in particular, what exactly are they looking for? What kind of competitive edge are they looking for?
Well, at China now, they're looking at a new thing, which is they used to see China as a basis from which to export. But now they see it's the rapid development of China's internal market. I agree very much that the crucial figure that was at the recent National People's Congress is not the 6.5%, 7% for this year, which is significant, of course. But the really important thing is the 6.5% between now and 2020. Because if foreign companies are going to undertake very large investments, they can't undertake these on the basis they will recoup their money in 1 year. They need to have stability for market, and 6.5% market growth is in an economy the size of China is the largest in the world. Actually, inward investment into China last year was highest in the world. That's slightly a freak. It was due to one big deal into the US. So normally, the absence of one deal into the US, sorry. But normally China will be second place after the US, and there's no sign of inward investment into China turning down. What they want to know is the stability and what approximate high or medium to high growth rate China will have over a 5-year period, and that's what they're getting out of the NPC and out of the Boao Forum.
And when we look at the GDP figure, maybe it's more important to look at the composition of the GDP. For example, is consumption taking a higher percentage of the GDP, of the economic growth?
Yes.
What are your views on this, Professor?
Sure. China's used to be the investment share of the GDP is close to 50%. Now it's coming down 46, 45%, but I'm still hoping that figure could be slowing down to 40%. Now remember that when you have less investment, usually that will be translating into less consumption and less others, including trade. So how to maintain the compositional balance? You need to reduce investment, but at the same time increasing consumption and keeping the 6.5%. That would take almost a tremendous amount of effort from the government trying to invent something, trying to do more business with the rest of the world, well, as with respect to some labor. And of course, this One Belt, One Road that's going to be a really exciting initiative, growth engine for China as well as others. And that is a lot of participants, they really care about it.
And at the same time, Professor, let's not forget the significance of the emerging economies.
Oh,
I
yes.
mean, they make up 30% of the global economy last year. So how important, Professor Xiao, will it be to further integrate these emerging economies?
Well, the emerging economy are definitely the future engine of growth for the global economy, because largely because the population, are large, and also they are going through a very rapid urbanization process, and they can benefit from the advanced economies, technology development, and the infrastructures which are emerging in China and in other places can be replicated very quickly, and that would support very active, dynamic private sector development, as we have seen, in China. Companies like Alibaba, Tencent, they actually developed based on very rapid development of internet infrastructure and also logistic, transportation infrastructures. So I think during right now the global economy are very slow, and that's why it is actually a good time to do some public investment to stimulate the global economy, and those public investments can later help to develop the private sector. And that experience which we have in China actually can apply to most emerging economies.
Well, Professor Xiao mentions public investment. I'd like to add more on this. It seems that China has a huge savings account totaling about 5 trillion US dollars. And the government has been trying to find a good way to invest that money. And it seems that infrastructure is a good way for investment. And that's evident by China's efforts to establish the AIIB as well as the Belt and Road Initiative. So, Mr. Ross, I'd like to ask you this. Why infrastructure is important for China's investment, and what kind of benefits have it brought to countries that's been investing?
It's because infrastructure aids all sections of the economy. Every single industry relies upon transport, communications, and so on. And it's not generally realized that actually China's infrastructure is very underdeveloped compared to the United States. To give you an example, if you take railway length per citizen, per person or per worker, in China it's only 7% of the United States. And people tend to look at the investment per year, but infrastructure has a life of 20, 30, in some cases 100 years. So the accumulated infrastructure stock of the United States or any advanced economy is much, much higher than China, and it will take China decades to catch up. But incidentally, I was also in charge of London's economic policy for 8 years, and that was one of the most developed economies in the entire world, city economies in the whole world. But they were obsessed with the question of infrastructure, because once you've got enough of one type of infrastructure, for example roads, you need another one, like the enormous expenditure which is going into ICT technology, intranet development, internet development, and these types of things. All that changes is you have new and more advanced infrastructure which is required in information technology, and that will go on for decades.
Now, Professor Hu, do you think that infrastructure is actually the best way for China's overseas investment?
Oh, you got to be very careful. When I'm thinking about infrastructure, to me, it's sort of a scale economy argument. That you choose to build one road without anything else, it's not going to work. So you need road and power plant and maybe harbors, all those airport. So we're really talking about a scale economy. But China, it happens to be the country which is very experienced in the scale economy. China's market is big enough. So China has a lot of experience. Learn from the failed or the successful scale economy. I think this time China is trying to sell this kind of experiences on on Chinese friends. All kind of government, they need the infrastructure, and of course China will say, okay, you need an airport, you need a road, and you need others, so that to build the scale economy. And remember, infrastructure is just another name for scale economy.
And experts say that investing in infrastructure is a good way to share the fruits of your development with your neighbors. And good neighbors are very important for the country and the region. We'd like to thank our panel here, Professor Huo Deming from Peking University, and Professor Xiao Geng from the University of Hong Kong, and Mr. John Ross with the Financial Studies at Renmin University of China. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your insights.
Thank you.
And now stay with us for our next segment coming up. Well, a new government for Myanmar. NLD leader Suu Kyi has nominated to the cabinet as the country faces a major political and economic transformation. What lies ahead? Welcome back to World Insight. Aung San Suu Kyi was nominated as a cabinet minister in Myanmar's civilian government on Tuesday, giving her a formal position despite being blocked from the presidency in a nation ruled for decades by the military. Suu Kyi's National League for Democracy party came to power after a historic landslide victory in last year's general election. Now the new government will be sworn in on March 30th. We will discuss what changes the new government will bring to Myanmar and the region. But first, let's take a look at this.
Transition for Myanmar. Myanmar's Union Parliament has announced the names of 18 people nominated to be cabinet ministers, including Aung San Suu Kyi. The list only contains the names of the nominees. Their ministries will be decided later. According to a spokesperson of the ruling NLD, Aung San Suu Kyi will not only take the post of chairperson of the party, she will likely also take up some ministerial posts, including foreign minister.
People voted for her because they support her. Not the one they support will take a position in the government, or people will like that.
I think Aung San Suu Kyi taking a position in the government means that the government can do much better to develop our country.
Aung San Suu Kyi led the NLD to a majority win in Myanmar's first openly contested election in 25 years in November 2015. The win came 5 years to the day since she was released from 15 years of house arrest. Tingjol of Myanmar's ruling NLD won the presidential election last Tuesday with the highest number of votes through secret voting, becoming the country's new president for the next 5-year term. He is the second president of Myanmar after the military returned power to the civilian government in 2011, and a 9th president since the country gained independence in 1948.
There are many changes and developments in the country. The leaders all serve their people. What I expect the most is peace and stability in the country.
Myanmar has been ruled by the military for more than 50 years. The existing national civil servant system took shape under military rule, and reforming the institution is not as simple as removing its staff. Although Myanmar has undergone a stunning political and economic transformation in recent years, the country still faces huge challenges.
And to get more discussions on this, we're joined in the Beijing studio by Mr. Song Qingrun. He's Associate Professor of the Institute of South and Southeast Asian and Oceanian Studies from the China Institute of Contemporary International Relations. And in New Delhi, we have Mr. M.D. Nalapat, UNESCO Peace Chair and Director of the Geopolitics and International Relations Department at Manipal University. Over in Paris, we have Dr. Olivier Guillard, Associate Research Fellow at the French Institute for International and Strategic Affairs. Welcome, gentlemen, to all of you to World Insight. So let's begin with you, Mr. Song. It seems that Suu Kyi's road to the presidency has ended, at least for now. However, she's put her close ally into the chair, and she says she's going to rule, she's going to lead from the sidelines, and her NLD party controls the parliament. Can we say that she secured her power anyway?
Yes, anyway, whatever position she takes in the government or in the parliament or in the party, currently and in the near future, she is still or will be still the most influential political figure in Myanmar, maybe at least for 5 years or 10 years or even more years. So I think it is said that she will take maybe 4 ministers' position together, which just under a president, maybe she will become the most powerful minister in the new cabinet. And but in the future, maybe if she takes the minister position, she has to step down the LD chairperson or even the parliament members. So in the lower house, so maybe in the future she will focus on the government affairs in the future.
Well, she's going to make some really tough choices. And now, Mr. Nalapat, I'd like to ask you this. There have been a lot of uncertainties in forming the cabinet lineup, and the parliament just approved this list of nominations submitted by President-elect Tin Chau. That includes 21 ministries, and of course, it includes Suu Kyi. But the specific assignments are yet to be announced. So what can we expect?
Well, I think it's a very good thing that Daw Aung San Suu Kyi is elected to be in the government. I think it's unfortunate that the military in Myanmar has not yet ensured that the constitution will permit her to become the president of Myanmar, for a simple reason that the question of loyalty has already been answered. Suu Kyi has spent so many years in jail rather than go abroad. She has proved her loyalty to Myanmar. So, and in India, which you'll be watching very carefully, we had an experiment in which Sonia Gandhi was outside the government, and that experiment was not very successful. So looking at all this, I think it's very clear why Daw Aung San Suu Kyi elected to be in the government. She'll be much more effective inside the government than she would have been outside the government.
Well, loyalty, as you mentioned, has been proved, but Mr. Guillard, I'd like to ask you this. Suu Kyi obviously is going to make a lot of choices. Mr. Song in studio just mentioned that there's a long list, and her name is next to 4 ministries. That's going to consume a lot of her time. Whether or not she's going to take the job as the foreign minister or other jobs, she'll have to multitasking. And even with the most efficient support team around her, it's going to be very difficult for her to concentrate on just one thing. She says she'll be ruling above the president. What exactly does that mean, and what will be her priorities?
This is an interesting question, of course. What is quite true at the moment is that the challenge facing Aung San Suu Kyi, a new government, a government that is, for obvious reasons, without any experience so far, because, as you mentioned a bit earlier in your document, the military were leading the country for the previously half century. So, at the same time, there is a huge popular expectations on this new democratic government. At the same time, the international community, let's speak, for instance, the neighbors and the Western world, have as well a huge amount of expectations with this new democratic government, speaking about democracy, human rights, good governance, etc. And unfortunately for all these expectations, what we are prepared as observers, I guess that my colleagues probably do share part of this assessment, we do expect some kind of a roadmap pretty complicated, with a lot of expectation, domestic one and external one, and at the same time, in the middle, in the core of the issue, a government, democratic government, that will have to face many complicated challenges with probably not enough resources, human resources, material and financial and economic resources, and it could create some kind of management tension, some kind of misunderstanding with the population, and eventually, even if it's harder to explain that due to the fact that this new administration is not already in charge, we need to wait a couple of weeks more. But still, this will not be an easy job. It will be a job that, for Aung San Suu Kyi, let's remember that Aung San Suu Kyi is already, if I may say, she's a pretty good health, but she's 70. She has many competencies, many skills, but she has as well some kind of other ways. For instance, she is over managing everything from inside NLD to the outside. Then if she is in charge of her party, if she is in charge of so many foreign and domestic challenges and very heavy, complicated tasks, it may prove to be quite soon complicated or eventually a bit too much.
Well,
and let's see what the military in Myanmar will deal with this.
Well, there's a raft of challenges facing the new leadership, and one of the biggest challenges is perhaps its relationship with the military. The military is now still very powerful in Myanmar. For example, it still holds a quarter of the seats in parliament, and it has the veto power to any changes to the constitution, and it also controls 3 key ministries: home, border, and defense. So how do you view this power transition, Mr. Song?
Yeah, this power transition is a very big step, or even it has a historical meaning in Myanmar politics development. But we still clearly see that although LD and Daw Aung San Suu Kyi will lead most of the ministries in the new cabinet and will influence the parliament very much in the future. But we still have to know that the military, maybe currently in the next 5 years, 10 years, or even more years, it will still be very powerful in the politics, especially in the security and the intelligence of the police affairs in the country.
But how do you see the power transition taking place so far after the elections? Has it been smooth? Are there problems hampering the progress?
Basically speaking, it is very smooth. Maybe that common people expected. It is very smooth because the election result is recognized by the military, and the current government promised that it will hand the power at March 13 to the new government. And currently, the new government has basically been established. It just needs a ceremony.
But it's not going to be easy to mend ties with the military, as the military was the one who put Aung San Suu Kyi under house arrest for so many years.
Frankly speaking, I think after the election, the military and the LD and Daw Aung San Suu Kyi has kept basically good cooperation relations. And last year, after election, I went to the LD headquarters. I met the number 2 of LD Central Committee members and number 4. They told me that they will not forget the things have done to LD by the military, but they will forgive them. So it means that in the future they will cooperate with the military for the national interest. Basically, maybe there will be some power struggle in the future, but basically they will cooperate.
Mr. Nalapat, what do you think will be the future relations between the NLD and the military? How do you see this power transition from the military to the ministry?
Well, the main point about the military will basically be internal and external security. And I think the main focus is going to be on ensuring that any threats to Myanmar's territorial integrity be faced. Now, in all such questions, Daw Aung San Suu Kyi has taken a very firm line. She is very firmly a Burmese patriot, and she is going to work very hard to ensure that there is no danger to the territory of Myanmar. So having said that, I don't see that there is any real reason to worry about the military and Daw Aung San Suu Kyi. The fact is, both have learnt a very lot of lessons over these last 15 years, and both have understood the need to work with each other. The military understands it cannot run Myanmar on its own, and Daw Aung San Suu Kyi understands that you cannot do away with the Burmese military in the governance fabric, at least for the foreseeable future. So both sides have understood the situation very well. So I am very optimistic that there is going to be a very reasonably smooth cooperation between the military and the government, which is in effect headed by Aung San Suu Kyi.
Right, and let's also talk about other challenges awaiting the new government. President-elect Ting Chao promised clean and efficient government. However, we know that corruption and bureaucracy have been mounting in Myanmar for many years. So, Mr. Guillard, I'd like to ask you this. How much of a challenge do you think will it be for the new leadership to really deliver on that promise?
This will be probably one of the main obstacles waiting for Aung San Suu Kyi government, because once again, she, first of all, the next administration to be in charge has never ruled the country. It has always been an opposition country trying to promote democracy, human rights, etc. They have never had any experience. So when you come back from nothing with new experience and you arrive at a moment of history pretty complicated to lead a country of 55 million people, you are starting from nothing. It's complicated. At the same time, once again, if we go back to the last general elections, there has been a sort of huge tsunami or surge in favor of the NLD democratic agenda, with a lot of people. I was over there monitoring the elections, and people from any kind in the streets in Yangon, in Mandalay, in Sitwe were coming to you saying, let's give them a chance. The future is in our hands right now, and we have the feeling that the military will cooperate with Suu Kyi, which is fundamental for any chance to succeed. But still, when you have such a huge agenda with such a complicated roadmap, once again, and that, let's not forget things. I do not totally fully share the point or perspective of my colleagues, because when we see that the transition is said to have been smooth, it's relatively smooth. There have been behind the door very tense discussions between the chief. The senior general leading the army and Aung San Suu Kyi. There have been three or four informal or formal discussions, and we heard that the two last ones, there had been red lines that could not have been crossed.
Mr.
in
Guillard,
discussions
let me just
between the
jump in
NLD
here
leader.
and ask you this. As you mentioned, the country is now in transition, and so many changes have been taking place. There's this democratic experiment, and then Suu Kyi may still have a chance for the presidency. How do you envision Myanmar's future, Mr. Song?
There is a great hope, but there are still challenges. For example, just as the other experts said that in the economy, I will just give you some example. In Yangon City, the common salary one month for the workers in the factory maybe just a little more than $100 per month, maybe just $200 about. And then in the village or in small towns, the villages, the value salaries are much lower. So it is a heavy task for the new government to improve the people's well-being and to promote their village, their salary level. So second, I think for the peace issue, the internal conflicts in Myanmar have lasted at least scores of years, and so in the future, the new government should say that it wants to put the peace issue and the reconciliation issue to be the foremost task. But for the scores of years internal conflicts, it is not so easy for the next government in the next 5 years to resolve them quickly. So third, also to improve the environment to attract the foreign investment. So Myanmar now, it wants to for FDI very urgently, but the foreign companies still, some of the foreign companies still wait and see, to wait and see that Myanmar should improve the environment to attract the FDI quickly.
And of course, another important thing is how Myanmar's transition will affect the entire region. Mr. Nalapat, what would you say about this?
Well, I would like to say that you have a lot of Western observers who initially were very gung-ho about Aung San Suu Kyi, and today they are more and more negative about her. And the reason for that is she has not done what they expected her to do, which is go off in a direction which is focusing only on the West and ignoring China, ignoring India, ignoring the other countries of Asia. she is now having a much more balanced policy, and we are seeing that reflection in the highly critical comments now being made in Western media about Aung San Suu Kyi. My view is she's a pragmatic individual. She knows very, very clearly that China is important, India is important, investment from East Asia is important, investment from the Middle East is important, and ultimately it's going to be Asian investment that is going to ensure the growth of the Myanmar economy. Let's not forget the fact Europe is in economic crisis. Several of the European economies are almost bankrupt. The United States is going through its own issues. So ultimately, Aung San Suu Kyi will follow a pragmatic policy. And in this pragmatic policy, I am very confident she will pay a lot of attention on China and on India, which are the two largest countries, the two largest neighbors of Myanmar.
And I'd like to ask Mr. Sung our final question to end our discussion. What will be the preconditions for Suu Kyi to have a second chance to win her road to presidency?
The first and the foremost precondition is that to amend the relevant articles in the Constitution about the presidency, especially the article that if the people wants to become the president, his spouse and children will not be foreign citizens. So this is a very important section. So in the future, if she wants to become the president, she has to persuade the military to agree to change this, to amend this section.
So again, the power transition and her road to presidency is to some extent in the hand of the military. We'd like to thank our panel here, Mr. Sung Ting-ren in our Beijing studio, Mr. M.D. Nalapat in New Delhi, and also Mr. Olivier Guillard in Paris. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for sharing your views with us on that.
Merci.
And that's going to do it for this edition of World Insight on CCTV News. If you'd like to see more about our program, you can type World Insight CCTV News into your search engine or check out YouTube channel. And from me, Wang Wangmang, and all of us on the World Insight team, thank you so much for being with us, and I'll see you next time.